My beloved child. Pause here, because the next few moments are not ordinary. You did not arrive at these words by accident, and you are not hearing them at a random hour. Something has been moving beneath the silence, something hidden behind distance, pride, unanswered questions, and the quiet ache you tried so hard to bury. You have wondered whether the love was ever real. You have questioned whether you imagined the connection, whether you gave meaning to something that meant far less to them, whether the bond that once felt sacred simply disappeared when they walked away. But something has happened. Something they could no longer keep inside has finally crossed their lips. Your soulmate admitted they never stopped loving you. Not in the easy way people say things when they are lonely. Not as a passing confession born from nostalgia. Not because they suddenly became afraid of being alone. What they admitted came after a long internal battle, after countless nights of trying to silence your memory, after pretending that moving forward meant forgetting you, after discovering that distance can separate two lives but cannot always erase what the soul still recognizes. Stay here, because there is more hidden inside that confession than the words themselves. For a long time, they believed silence would protect them. They thought that if they said nothing, if they acted unaffected, if they carried on as though your absence had become normal, then eventually the feeling would lose its power. They believed time would perform a quiet miracle and remove you from the places where you still lived inside them. But time did not remove you. Time revealed you. It revealed the difference between temporary attention and genuine connection. It showed them how rare it was to feel understood without explaining everything. It showed them that not every smile carries warmth, not every conversation reaches the heart, and not every person can make the soul feel safe. The more they tried to replace the feeling, the more they discovered that what existed between you was not so easily repeated. They could meet new people, hear new voices, visit new places, and build new routines, yet something inside them remained unfinished. And the strangest part was this: the moments when they seemed strongest were often the moments when your memory was closest. They learned how to hide it well. They became skilled at appearing calm. They smiled when others mentioned love. They changed the subject when someone asked about you. They told themselves they had accepted what happened. They may even have said words that sounded final, words that made you believe there was no feeling left. But the heart does not always obey the story the mouth is forced to tell. Their heart kept returning to you. Not always loudly. Sometimes it happened in the smallest ways. A familiar song playing unexpectedly. A phrase someone used that sounded like something you once said. A scent in a passing crowd. A certain hour of the night when the world became too quiet for distraction. A photograph they thought they had deleted. A place they avoided because it carried too much history. Each time, your memory returned not as a simple image, but as a feeling. And feelings were what they could not control. They could control whether they messaged you. They could control whether they checked your name. They could control whether they admitted the truth to friends or family. But they could not control the sudden heaviness in their chest when they imagined you laughing with someone else. They could not control the regret that surfaced whenever they remembered the way you once looked at them with trust. They could not control the questions that appeared when the night became still. What if I had stayed? What if I had spoken honestly? What if I had not allowed fear to make the decision? What if the person I was searching for was the person I pushed away? These questions followed them longer than they expected. At first, they resisted them. They blamed timing. They blamed misunderstandings. They blamed circumstances, pressure, confusion, the past, even you. They searched for a reason that would allow them to keep their pride intact. They wanted an explanation that would make their silence feel justified. But truth has a way of waiting. It does not always force its way into the room. Sometimes it remains quietly in the corner until every excuse has exhausted itself. Then, when the heart no longer has the strength to run, truth steps forward. That moment came for them. It may have happened in a room where no one expected anything important to be said. It may have happened during a late conversation, when their defenses were low and the burden of pretending had become too heavy. Someone may have asked a simple question about you. Someone may have noticed the change in their face when your name appeared. Someone may have challenged the story they had repeated for too long. And then the words came. Not perfectly. Not confidently. Perhaps their voice lowered. Perhaps they looked away. Perhaps they hesitated before admitting what they had spent so long denying, that I never stopped loving them. Those words changed the atmosphere. Because once truth is spoken aloud, it becomes harder to hide from. They heard themselves say it. They felt the weight of it. And in that moment, everything they had buried rose to the surface at once: the regret, the tenderness, the longing, the fear, the memories, the unanswered apologies, the dreams they never allowed themselves to mourn. They did not only admit they still loved you. They admitted they had been carrying that love through every attempt to forget. My beloved child, there is something important you must understand. Their confession does not erase what happened. It does not undo the nights you cried alone. It does not remove the confusion you carried when they chose silence instead of honesty. It does not ask you to abandon your wisdom or return to a place that wounded you without proof of change. This message is not asking you to chase. It is asking you to see clearly. Because for too long, you believed their silence meant indifference. You mistook their distance for peace. You assumed their absence meant they had moved on without looking back. But distance and peace are not the same. Some people leave because they no longer care. Others leave because they care more deeply than they know how to handle. Some disappear because the connection asks them to become honest, accountable, vulnerable, and brave, and they have not yet learned how. Your soulmate was not prepared for the depth of what they felt. They were prepared for attraction. They were prepared for excitement. They were prepared for the kind of love that remains easy, predictable, and safe. But they were not prepared for a connection that exposed hidden wounds, challenged old patterns, and revealed how much fear still controlled them. You did not merely make them feel loved. You made them feel seen. And being seen can be terrifying for someone who has survived by hiding. You saw the tenderness beneath their pride. You noticed the sadness behind their silence. You felt when their words did not match their emotions. You recognized the parts of them they kept hidden from everyone else. Even when they tried to appear distant, you could sense the battle inside them. This is why the connection felt so intense. It was not only about affection. It was about recognition. Something within them recognized something within you, and that recognition disturbed the life they had carefully arranged. It made ordinary connections feel empty. It made shallow conversations feel exhausting. It made their old defenses easier to notice. They wanted your love, but they feared what it required. Your love required honesty. It required consistency. It required them to speak instead of disappear, to face instead of avoid, to heal instead of repeat, to choose instead of hesitate. And at that time, they were not ready. You may have taken their hesitation personally. You may have believed you were not enough. You may have searched through every conversation, every message, every memory, trying to find the moment you became too much or too difficult to love. But hear this carefully. You were not too difficult to love. The love was too real for the version of them that was still committed to hiding. They could handle attention without responsibility. They could handle affection without depth. They could handle being wanted as long as no one asked them to become emotionally present. But with you, they could not remain untouched. You awakened something. You awakened hope in the part of them that had stopped believing in lasting love. You awakened grief in the part of them that remembered every previous abandonment. You awakened desire, but you also awakened fear. You awakened dreams of a future, and those dreams forced them to confront the possibility of loss. So instead of risking being left, they created distance first. Instead of admitting they needed you, they pretended they could live without you. Instead of saying, "I am afraid," they became cold. Instead of saying, "Please do not give up on me," they acted as if your presence did not matter. But it mattered. It mattered more than they admitted. And after you stepped back, after your energy changed, after you stopped offering the same access to your heart, they felt the absence they once believed they could manage. They expected relief. They expected life to become simpler. For a brief moment, perhaps it did. There were no difficult conversations. No emotional accountability. No fear of being fully known. No pressure to decide what the connection meant. But then the silence they had created began speaking. It spoke through empty mornings. It spoke through celebrations that felt incomplete. It spoke when they reached for their phone with something to tell you and remembered they no longer had the right. It spoke when something good happened and your name was the first thought in their mind. It spoke when something painful happened and they realized no one comforted them the way you once did. Slowly, the freedom they thought they wanted began to feel like loss. And still, they resisted. They told themselves it would pass. They tried to become busy. They may have poured their energy into work, social gatherings, distractions, or new connections. They may have laughed louder, stayed out longer, or appeared more active than ever. But busyness cannot heal what honesty refuses to touch. Each distraction ended. Each room eventually grew quiet. Each conversation with another person eventually revealed what was missing. It was not that every new person was wrong. It was that no one carried your particular presence. No one understood the hidden meanings in their silence. No one knew the story behind certain expressions. No one could recreate the way your energy made them feel both calm and alive. They began comparing without intending to. A new person might say something kind, and they would remember how deeply you once understood them. Someone might offer affection, and they would remember how natural it felt to receive yours. Someone might laugh with them, and they would remember the sound of your laughter during a moment they had not thought about in months. This comparison frightened them because it confirmed what they were trying to deny. You were not simply someone they used to know. You had become a measure inside their heart. And nothing seemed to reach it. That realization did not come all at once. It came in layers. First as discomfort. Then as restlessness. Then as longing. Then as regret. Finally, as truth. The truth was simple, but it broke through every defense. They never stopped loving you. They stopped expressing it. They stopped protecting it. They stopped choosing it openly. But they did not stop feeling it. There is a difference. And that difference has been haunting them. You may wonder why they did not return sooner. Why they did not confess when the feeling first became clear. Why they allowed so much time to pass while both of you carried the weight in silence. The answer is not simple. Part of them feared rejection. They imagined reaching out and discovering you no longer cared. They imagined hearing your voice without the warmth they remembered. They imagined seeing that someone else had taken the place they abandoned. Another part feared forgiveness. Yes, forgiveness. Because forgiveness would require them to face what they had done. It would require them to look directly at your pain and accept that their choices helped create it. They could not hide behind excuses if you stood before them with the truth. Sometimes guilt does not lead a person closer. Sometimes guilt makes them hide. They told themselves they were protecting you by staying away. They may have believed you deserved someone better. They may have convinced themselves that returning would only reopen the wound. But beneath these reasons was another fear. What if you still loved them? What if the connection was still alive? What if they returned and could no longer pretend? That possibility frightened them more than rejection because it meant they would have to change. It meant they could not come back with the same inconsistency, the same avoidance, the same half-truths. They knew your heart had already survived too much. They knew love alone would not be enough. They knew that if they approached you again, words would have to become action. This is where the story has been shifting. While you were learning to rebuild yourself, they were being forced to look at the person they had been. While you were discovering how to hold your own heart, they were discovering what it cost to mishandle yours. You thought nothing was happening because you could not see it. But invisible changes are often the deepest. A tree does not announce every movement of its roots. The dawn does not explain how it travels through darkness. Healing often begins in places no one can witness. Something within them began breaking open. The pride that once kept them silent started feeling like a prison. The excuses that once comforted them started sounding empty. The future they imagined without you no longer felt convincing. Then came the moment they could not ignore. Perhaps they saw something connected to you. Perhaps they heard that you were doing well. Perhaps someone mentioned that you had changed, grown stronger, become more distant from the pain they once knew. And a fear rose in them. Not the fear of losing control. The fear that they had already lost the chance to make things right. That fear moved through them differently. It was no longer dramatic or impulsive. It was quiet, heavy, mature. It showed them that love cannot be postponed forever. It showed them that people do not remain waiting in the same emotional place simply because someone is not ready. They realized you had been healing. You had been becoming someone who no longer begged to be chosen. You had been learning that love should not require you to abandon your dignity. You had been discovering that missing someone does not mean you must return to the same version of the relationship. And this realization made their confession inevitable. They could continue pretending to others, but they could no longer pretend to themselves. Someone close to them may have noticed first. They noticed the way your soulmate became quiet when love was discussed. They noticed how certain memories changed their expression. They noticed that behind every claim of being fine, there was an unfinished sentence. At first, your soulmate denied it. Then they minimized it. Then they became defensive. But eventually, the wall cracked. They admitted that no one had made them feel the way you did. They admitted they still wondered about you. They admitted they had checked for signs of your life from a distance. They admitted they had rehearsed messages they never sent. They admitted that sometimes, just before sleep, they imagined what they would say if you were beside them. And finally, with nowhere left to hide, they said the words. I never stopped loving them. The person who heard it may have remained silent for a moment. Not because the confession was surprising, but because it was finally honest. Perhaps they replied with the question your soulmate had been avoiding. Then why did you let them go? That question entered deeply. Your soulmate had explanations, but none of them felt worthy. They could say they were confused. They could say the timing was wrong. They could say life was complicated. They could say they were afraid. But every answer led back to the same painful truth. They let fear speak louder than love. And now they were living with the echo. My beloved child, you must not mistake their regret for your responsibility. You are not being called to rescue them from the consequences of their choices. You are not meant to rush toward a confession you have not yet heard directly. You are not meant to build your future on imagined promises. This revelation is not a command. It is clarity. It is here to release you from the belief that you were forgotten because you were unworthy. You were not forgotten. You were carried in silence. You were remembered in places you never saw. You were missed in moments no one witnessed. But your worth does not depend on their longing. This is the part your heart must understand. Their love may be real, but so is your healing. Their regret may be deep, but so are the boundaries you built. Their confession may open a door, but you are no longer required to walk through every door simply because it once held your dream. The version of you who waited without answers is changing. You have begun to recognize that love must be more than emotion. It must become courage. It must become honesty. It must become presence, consistency, responsibility, and care. Your soulmate is beginning to understand this too. For the first time, they are seeing that saying, "I love you," is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of accountability. They cannot merely return with tears. They cannot simply tell you that they suffered too. They cannot expect the past to disappear because they finally became honest. If they truly love you, they must be willing to meet the person you have become, not search for the version of you who accepted less. This realization is transforming their approach. They have started questioning what they would do differently. They have begun imagining not only the reunion, but the responsibility that follows it. They are asking themselves whether they can become steady where they were once uncertain, open where they were once guarded, brave where they were once avoidant. And this is where the mystery deepens. Because their confession was not the final revelation. It was the first. After admitting they never stopped loving you, something else surfaced, something they had not told anyone before. There was a specific moment when they almost returned. A moment when your name was open before them. A message was written. Their hands hovered over the decision that could have changed everything. The words were not casual. They were not a simple greeting. They were not an attempt to test whether you still cared. They wrote what they had been too afraid to say while you were still close. They wrote an apology. They wrote that losing you had changed them. They wrote that every attempt to move on had only made the truth clearer. They wrote that they loved you. And then they erased it. You never saw the message. You never knew how close the silence came to breaking. Why did they delete it? Because just before sending it, they saw something that made them believe you had already chosen a life without them. Maybe it was a photograph. Maybe it was a comment. Maybe it was a rumor. Maybe it was only their own fearful interpretation of something ordinary. But in that instant, they believed they were too late. Their courage collapsed. They told themselves that contacting you would be selfish. They imagined interrupting your peace. They imagined being ignored. They imagined becoming a painful memory you had already outgrown. So they deleted the words and returned to silence. But the message did not disappear from them. They remembered every line. They replayed the moment again and again. And each time, the same thought returned. What if I had sent it? That unsent message became a symbol of every opportunity fear had stolen. From then on, they began noticing how often they had allowed assumptions to decide the future. They had assumed you would never understand. They had assumed vulnerability would make them weak. They had assumed distance would protect them. They had assumed you had moved on because facing uncertainty felt impossible. But love built on assumptions cannot breathe. They are beginning to realize that silence is also a decision. And silence has consequences. For you, the silence became a wound. For them, it became a cage. You spent months trying to understand what their absence meant. They spent those same months trying to justify why they remained absent. You blamed yourself. They blamed timing. You wondered whether they cared. They wondered whether they still had a right to. Two hearts remain trapped on opposite sides of the same unspoken truth. Yet you were not standing still. Your healing began quietly. At first, it did not feel like healing. It felt like survival. You learned how to move through mornings without the message you hoped for. You learned how to face nights when memory returned. You learned how to stop searching for hidden meaning in every sign. You started choosing yourself, even when it felt lonely. You began to gather the pieces of your confidence that the experience had scattered. You remembered who you were before uncertainty made you question everything. You discovered that your tenderness was not weakness. Your loyalty was not foolishness. Your depth was not a burden. You were never wrong for loving sincerely. The pain came from offering sincere love to someone who did not yet know how to hold it. This distinction changed you. You stopped asking, "Why was I not enough?" You began asking, "Why did I believe I had to prove my worth to someone who could already see it?" That question became a doorway. Through it, you began returning to yourself. Your energy shifted. Your spirit became quieter but stronger. You no longer needed every answer to continue forward. You no longer needed their confession to validate what you had felt. You began understanding that some connections are real even when the people involved are not yet ready to honor them. And strangely, your healing is what awakened them most. When you stopped reaching, they felt the space. When you stopped explaining, they heard their own thoughts. When you stopped carrying the connection alone, they felt its true weight. Your absence became a mirror. It showed them the care they had taken for granted. It showed them the patience they had mistaken for permanence. It showed them that someone can love deeply and still choose to walk away from confusion. This was not punishment. It was consequence. And consequence became their teacher. They began revisiting moments differently. They remembered times you asked for honesty, and they called you demanding. Now they understood you were asking for emotional safety. They remembered times you became quiet after they pulled away. They thought you were being distant, but now they understood you were protecting yourself. They remembered the final conversations, the pauses in your voice, the way you tried to remain composed while something inside you was breaking. They saw what they could not see then. You were not trying to control them. You were trying to understand whether it was safe to keep loving them. This realization brought them to tears. Not because they suddenly became weak, but because truth removed the final shield. They had told themselves that you left too easily. Now they understood how long you stayed. They had told themselves you gave up. Now they saw how many chances you quietly offered. They had told themselves you stopped caring. Now they realized you had to care for yourself because they would not protect the connection. And then another memory returned. A sentence you once said. Perhaps you said, "I do not need perfection. I just need honesty." Perhaps you said, "Tell me what you feel, even if it scares you." Perhaps you said, "Do not make me guess where I stand." At the time, they heard pressure. Now they hear love. You were giving them a safe place to tell the truth. They did not use it. And now they long for one more opportunity. But something is different. They no longer want to return merely because they miss you. Missing you is no longer enough. They are beginning to understand that longing without growth only recreates the same pain. They want to become someone capable of staying. Whether they will succeed is still unfolding. That is why you must remain grounded. Do not let the idea of their confession pull you back into waiting. Continue becoming the person your healing is revealing. Continue building a life that does not collapse when someone becomes uncertain. Continue honoring the standards pain taught you to create. Love may return. But it must meet you differently. It must come with truth. It must come with effort. It must come without games, hidden tests, or emotional disappearing. It must be willing to stand in daylight. Your soulmate knows this now. That knowledge is why they have not approached carelessly. They understand that one message could reopen everything. They understand that your heart is not a place they can enter, leave, and enter again without consequence. So they are preparing. Not perfectly. Not without fear. But more honestly than before. They are thinking about the first words. They are wondering whether to begin with an apology or the truth. They are imagining how your face might change when you hear their voice. They are afraid you will remain silent. They are afraid you will say it is too late. But beneath the fear is a new willingness. For the first time, they are considering that courage does not guarantee the outcome. Courage means speaking truth even when the answer cannot be controlled. This is the lesson love has been teaching them. They once believed vulnerability was dangerous because it gave another person power. Now they understand that hiding was what gave fear power. They once believed silence kept them safe. Now they understand silence cost them the person they loved. They once believed time would make the feeling disappear. Now they understand time only made the truth undeniable. Your name still carries emotion for them. But it carries something else now. Respect. They respect the strength it took for you to walk away from uncertainty. They respect the way you loved without becoming cruel when hurt. They respect the fact that you did not destroy them publicly, even when they left you with private pain. They see your grace differently now. And they know grace is not permission. Your forgiveness, if it ever comes, would be a gift, not something they are owed. Your attention would be sacred, not something they can assume. Your trust would have to be rebuilt, not demanded. This is the maturity beginning to form within them. The confession they made to someone else was practice for the confession they may soon have to make to you. But there is one more layer. The person who heard them admit they never stopped loving you did not simply listen. They told your soulmate something unexpected. They said, "Then stop speaking about them as if the story is over." Those words shook them. Because your soulmate had been living as though the ending had already been written. They had treated fear as prophecy. They had assumed your response without allowing you to give it. They had buried the connection before honestly facing it. The person continued. You do not know what will happen. But you do know what happened when you stayed silent. That truth became impossible to ignore. Your soulmate left, the conversation changed. They went home with your name louder in their heart than it had been in months. They opened the place where your old messages remained. They read the conversations slowly, not searching for proof that you still cared, but seeing evidence of how deeply you once did. They noticed details they had overlooked. The patience in your words. The moments you tried to understand instead of accuse. The times you softened your own pain because you sensed theirs. They realized how often you created emotional safety while receiving uncertainty in return. And for the first time, they did not defend themselves. They simply felt it. They let the regret move through them. They allowed themselves to mourn not only losing you, but losing the version of you who trusted them without hesitation. They understood that even if love remained, innocence had changed. Some things could be repaired. But they could not be restored by pretending nothing happened. This realization did not make them hopeless. It made them serious. They began to understand that a real second chance is not a return to the beginning. It is the creation of something new, built by two people who are willing to face what destroyed the old. Would you be willing? They do not know. And neither should you decide before truth stands before you. For now, your task is not to predict. It is to remain whole. Let no message, no sign, no dream, no sudden memory pull you away from the peace you have fought to reclaim. You can acknowledge the connection without surrendering your discernment. You can believe love existed without romanticizing the pain. You can care and still require change. You can forgive and still move slowly. You can hear an apology and still watch the actions that follow. This is not hardness. This is wisdom. Your heart is not closing. It is learning how to open safely. And perhaps that is why this truth is reaching you now, not earlier, when you would have run toward a single word, but now, when you can stand still and ask whether the love being offered is mature enough to remain. Your soulmate senses the difference in you. They know the old approach will not work. They know charm will not be enough. They know emotion will not erase history. They know that if they come, they must come honestly. And something extraordinary is forming around that realization. They have begun writing again. Not the same message they deleted before. A new one. This time, the words are slower. More direct. Less focused on convincing you, more focused on taking responsibility. They have started with your name many times. They have erased it. Started again. Paused. Walked away. Returned. Each version brings them closer to the truth. They are not trying to say everything perfectly. They are trying to avoid hiding inside beautiful words. They want to tell you that they loved you even when they acted like they did not. They want to admit that fear made them cruel in ways they did not understand at the time. They want to tell you that losing your presence forced them to see the difference between being loved and being known. They want to tell you that they do not expect an immediate answer. But there is one sentence they keep struggling to write. One sentence more difficult than, "I still love you." Because this sentence requires them to release control completely. It requires them to admit not only what they feel, but what they are asking from you. They have written it 3 times. Deleted it 3 times. Yet the words keep returning. And tonight, as they sit again before the unsent message, something inside them has changed. Their hand is no longer trembling because they do not know what to say. It is trembling because they finally do. The message is almost complete. Your name is at the beginning. The truth is in the middle. And at the end is the sentence they have been too afraid to send, the sentence that may change the direction of both your lives. But just before they press send, they receive something unexpected. A notification. A name. A revelation connected to you. And what they see makes them freeze.